boutique publishing, boutique copywriting business called Just Two Guys New AI.
Yeah, you were telling me that. That's actually a pretty cool idea.
I feel like that would be funny. I don't know if that's like really hard.
I don't know. I mean, I've seen.
You could actually notify someone if they're being recorded. This is a good idea.
My best friend is going to sue me. It is.
That's
Jesus Christ! All right, this episode is over.
Really not gave glass, but thanks.
Yeah, these were frosty and the other ones weren't. So cheers, buddy.
Should.
He's grabbing the roasties.
Years.
Oh, this is fucking delicious, dude.
I know, dude. This is a seasonal. I had it last year. I loved it. So I saw it on the shelves. Hyper-personalized.
It's the personalized.
Did you read?
It's like scrunch, dude. Give me a break.
You know how to read text like that?
Fucking a linguistics podcast.
I like this, and you can read things like that easier.
Whoa, dude, are you serious? Dude, you're right. What is that?
You don't remember like the fucking word things?
Oh yeah, dude.
On paper, it's like really long, stretched out, and you tip it, then you can read it.
I don't remember that now.
Read, start.
Yep.
You're welcome.
All right, well, let's get into our actual agenda here. Oh, Lord. So,
Hold on to your butts.
Welcome to the Word Warrior podcast, friends. My guest is my longtime friend, Evan Franklin. Probably his primary trait in existence is being annoying.
So I'm married with a kid and I was single.
Evan's an English major.
English graduate, actually.
English graduate.
Yeah. Some respect on my name.
And I thought it would be, we share a lot of like things in common with love of language and etymology, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And to start it out, I just wanted to ask you, like, what was like your decision path on like getting an English degree? Was it just like something that was easy, or was it actual conscious decision?
Yeah, I would say it was a conscious decision. I kind of fell into it, but it was, going back to high school, I thought I struggled with writing, and then one of my teachers basically sung my praises and talked about how good of a writer I was, and said, and coached me up a little bit and helped me quite a bit. And I started to realize I have a bit of a knack for it.
Yes.
And I really like it. I like studying grammar, and I've always been good at spelling, like naturally. And so like I always had a penchant for wanting to write and be around words because I felt like I was good at them.
Penchant.
No, I also speak French. It's penchant. So that was when I started to realize that I liked writing. And then I thought I was into sports. I still am into sports, but I really wanted to get into sports journalism. And I was going into the communications department in college at the University of Washington. And I took one class in the communications department and realized that, well, it was kind of a drastic decision, but I took that one class and I realized that I didn't want to stay in that department. I didn't think that what I was learning from that was productive. So I instead started working for the newspaper at UW, which is shorthand for University of Washington, or a nickname. And I started working for the newspaper, writing for the sports department, and it was fun, and I liked it, but I also didn't get along well or get good assignments from my second editor. And so I sort of also at that point realized that maybe interviewing people and writing short form articles wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. So I just kind of turned myself towards English because I like reading and writing and that kind of thing. And I have a knack for bullshit. So I kind of joke often that I have a degree in bullshit because you can not read a book and write an entire essay and convince someone that you've read the book if you just come up with some sort of nuanced thesis. It's
college for you, right?
It was pretty great how little effort, the less effort I put in, the better I did. It was really odd. I got busier at work. I worked full time. I went to school full time, and my grades went up, and my praise from my professors went up, and eventually I got to do one-on-one independent study with like my favorite professor, who I basically followed around and did every class that he taught. And I wasn't even an honors student, but I got to sit in on his honors class just because I hustled, and I talked to him, and I was like, I just want to sit in and like do one-on-one study with you instead of doing what most English majors have to do, which is called a capstone class. What's that? It's essentially everyone who graduates is required to do a capstone, which is it's the your final class. It's your final project, and it's usually culminates in a big paper of some kind, a research paper, and it can be on whatever the hell you want it to be if you pick the right class. And I didn't want to have to pick the right class, and I didn't want to work with the professor who was running the capstone class for my last quarter in college. So I just petitioned the department and got them to let me continue on a paper that I had developed in this other professor's class. a year earlier, and I got to do that, and it was great. It was so much fun. And then I didn't work in writing for a while, and now I work as a technical writer for a medical company. And the rest is history.
Nice, dude. So you're having fun now, or is your writing life annoying?
The writing part of my life isn't annoying. It's the not writing that I
The current job market, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I want to write more. I'm with the transition to AI. I like editing as well. I actually consider myself a stronger editor than a writer. So, and I used to edit with friends' papers for fun in college. Like it got to the point where I had to cut people off because it was too many people asking me to edit the papers, which was like, it wasn't that many. It was like 5 or 6 people, but
Still
like,
a lot.
that's a lot of people to edit everyone's 10-page paper
Yeah.
that they're getting to me the day before it's due. Like,
Yeah, so we were chatting the other week about lots of stuff, and I mentioned one of my favorite realizations was how all knowledge comes from comparison. And you really vibed with that concept. Why does that vibe with you? What stood out with that for you?
I think for me, and this kind of goes back to my paper at my final paper with my favorite professor, Lulich Judasoke. Basically, I made a hot take thesis that I didn't fully hash out effectively, and he graded me accordingly, fairly. But I was basically saying that authenticity in a vacuum, like authenticity does not exist. Pure authenticity. Everything exists within context of whatever you've experienced, whatever you've heard, whatever you've learned, whatever you've seen.
Right.
Nothing exists in a vacuum.
Do you mean more like
consciousness?
originality? Is that what you mean? Or do you really mean authenticity?
No, I mean authenticity in that people might say an artist is authentic or their message is authentic, but that message can't exist without some context. Whether that context is, if I see the Vietnam War Memorial, I might cry because I know the context, I know the history. If someone who doesn't know about that sees the Vietnam War Memorial, they'll go, oh, okay, this looks like a nice piece of architecture.
Yeah.
You know, so context is everything, and everything exists in relation to something, whether you know about it or not. So knowledge exists in comparison to things in that same way, where you know the name Evan, I know the name Alex. There were 5 people, I think, at my wedding named Alex. Like, there was only 100 people at my wedding, not even. That's a lot of people with the same name.
Yeah.
But you hear that name Alex and you go, oh, that's a normal name. But then you hear the name D'Artagnan. And if you haven't heard of the Three Musketeers, if you don't know about the Three Musketeers, then you don't know about that name. And so it's weird to you. Or Atticus from To Kill a Mockingbird. That's a better example, I think, because it's a little more approachable and more people have read that.
Yeah.
That name is peculiar, but it's familiar to anyone who went to high school in America, for the most part. The United States of America, let's be clear about that. Not like Chile,
Canada and Mexico.
Uruguay. So yeah, I think your point, knowledge exists in comparison, is similar to my point that authenticity isn't. It's not to say that an artist is inauthentic. That's not my point. My point is to say that an artist got to the point of creating whatever they created in comparison or context to who they are, what they've learned, what they've seen, what they've experienced, and therefore you can't create in a vacuum without any experience or context or history.
Right.
Jazz, I don't know that much about jazz, so let's put that out there. But I've read some of Ralph Ellison, who wrote the Invisible Man, not the H.G. Wells novel, but a Black experience, like speculative fiction novelist. And he wrote extensively about jazz. And he writes about the need to master the art form, so whatever instrument you play, in order to improvise and innovate. So you have to become good at the technique before you're allowed to mess around and do the things that made people like Louis Armstrong famous, right? Like his improv is what he's famous for, not his ability to just sit and play the trumpet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
How is that? How does that relate to the?
You can't innovate without becoming a master of the craft.
Right.
Or not you can't. Innovation is better suited by a master of a craft rather than a dilettante or someone who doesn't know the craft.
Okay. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But how does that relate to authenticity or comparison, knowledge comparison concepts?
The knowledge in this case is the ability to improvise or play an instrument on key, in tune, and on beat, or off key, off tune, off beat, if that's what sounds good in the context of improvising.
Yeah.
So it all comes from that comparison of what is good music. Just from an objective standpoint, there is a mathematical definition of like big, on time, on beats, well tuned.
Right.
There's
the scientific side of it
science to
versus
it.
the
Yeah.
creative side.
Right. So in that same context, innovative or nuanced ideas can be viewed as jazz. New concepts. The Earth used to be considered flat. Like, it still kind of is, which is great. Because it leads to people like the fact that there are people who think that. I almost said people who are dumb enough to think that, but I like that there are people that think that
Because it gives context.
it gives context and it gives a conversation that you can actually have. And just because we're on polar opposites, pun intended, because the Earth is round,
Nice, good job.
spherical actually. Actually, it's not a perfect sphere, but
It's an oblong.
sphere. Oblate, I think is
Oblate?
oblate. I think that's the
Oblique?
adjective for
Not oblique. Oblate.
oblique is not correct.
Oblate. I'll have to look that up. That's interesting.
I think it's an oblate sphere, which is that it's an oblong sphere. Sadly.
Nice.
Anyways, the fact that there is that argument that's so disjointed is similar to arguments. This I know this is part of our agenda that we can just transition. This is a good.
Good
not antonym. The political, the divisiveness or having differing views leads to dialogue, and that's
Right.
helpful. That's valuable.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
for context, since we're going to lead into that, that's a perfect transition. So my segue, thank you. My sort of point, one of my like solid foundational life beliefs is that all extremes are bad or negative in some way, and also all absolutes are by definition unobtainable, and in that context also all extremes, like people often will swing between extremes and then settle on something balanced or in the middle, but some people definitely, for whatever reason, for many different kinds of reasons, will be like fixated on an extreme, and it causes all sorts of fucking problems. So my viewpoint is like, you can experience extremes, and extremes offer a way to have a conversation. But in reality, everything is, nuanced and
Gray.
in the gray, and that's where the conversation occurs. And when people are stuck in extremes, it only creates division and conflict. But when people are able to consider, like the Aristotle quote, it's one of my favorites. I'll paraphrase. It's someone who can entertain a thought without accepting it that's the mark of an educated human, right?
Yeah.
So that's like, in my opinion, what we need to get back to. These are critical thinkers, people who can entertain even concepts that are the exact opposite of what they feel is right or true. Side note, I do think that there is such a thing as objective truth, but I know there's lots of people out there who think there is no such thing as objective truth, that everything is only true in context of other things, which might be true too. I don't know, but that's like, that's where valuable dialogue and diplomacy occurs, is in the nuance, is in the gray. And that's, the further you go to extremes, the more division and conflict occurs. The more you stay in the nuance and the gray, the more that we can humanistically progress and find peace and cooperation. So that's kind of like my general viewpoint.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's kind of a privileged position to say that you're a centrist on political issues.
Yeah.
But it's also a privilege to be an extremist in some ways.
Yeah.
If you live in a bubble where you can be an extremist one way or the other, you can get lost in that.
Yeah.
And then you lose sight of reality and the nuance and the gray. When things are black and white, people die. That's just the fact of the matter. That's been since the beginning of human history.
Yeah.
That's what happens. So
yeah, you're right though. We're very lucky to live in a time, or a timeline, if you believe in the multiverse, where we can, which side note, I don't know. I don't think I'm leaning towards no versus yes on the multiverse thing.
Yeah.
But quantum theory. Yeah. But
read Dark Matter. Blake Crouch. Great book.
Blake Crouch.
The show's
incredible.
The book, great.
Yeah. I haven't seen the show yet, but the book was fun. I think I've read it 2 or 3 times. It's so good. Listen.
Okay.
Next subject. Anyway, yeah, we are privileged to be able to live in the nuance, to be able to live in the gray.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who in the world don't have a choice. They're just forced into an extreme.
Right.
And that sucks. And it's not to sound, I'm not super stoked about the concept of being privileged, because we're all struggling in this world.
Yeah.
We're all
has their own struggle.
Everyone does, but even saying that is frustrating to me, because though it's true, it also, in my opinion, kind of diminishes, like saying everyone struggles diminishes everybody's struggle and everybody's individual sort of whatever.
Kind of like saying all lives matter.
Yeah, it's like, okay, like we can go down sort of like all sorts of conspiracies about the bullshit behind a lot of different activist groups and the political agendas and the money, and there's all sorts of corruption and bullshit. But while that's true, it also is very true as well that what it means, what like all lives matter, Black Lives Matter, those things subjectively are extremely, they mean different things to different people.
Right.
And it's
almost like context and comparison.
And nuance and gray. So it's like, that's why, like, look, everybody has their own opinions, and everybody can choose to either have an aggressive sort of conflict-based stance on these social and political issues.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, when you step back from basically, when you realize that the point of a lot of the corruption behind the curtains is to create division and conflict, to keep us distracted from what's really fucking going on.
Yeah.
For me anyway, and I think for a lot of people who are aware enough, but also not for a lot of people, for me, it makes it far less interesting to argue these, to be in the pit fighting and arguing with other people about these things.
Right.
Because the more that I realize that it is created, it's not just something that sprung up out of nowhere, which I think is very uncommon. A lot of people, basically, I think when people assume that something is a natural social development, that's actually extremely rare, that actually happens. It's usually caused by something.
Right.
Yes, some things do come out of the gestalt for, to not to jump ahead to our words, but for the episode, but like, that's some things do spring out of the social, what's happening at the time, but at the same time, it's like, there are a lot of things that are created to keep us distracted and divided. And when you understand that, it's for me anyway, it makes it much easier to have empathy, and it just becomes not interesting for me to go into the trenches and be a part of this divisive conversation. I would much rather have conversations like this, where we're talking about how can you step back from the bullshit and be a part of like the calming conversation, the nuanced conversation, and how can we have these types of conversations that make people easier to get along and connect.
Yeah. Well, and I think a good like analogy, just to kind of simplify it, it's not just about politics, it's not just about religion, it's not just about whether the earth is flat or round or oblate. The same can be said for health, right? Like crash diets are unhealthy.
Right.
Ask any doctor, for the most part, any respectable doctor, let's be clear. You shouldn't crash diet. You should have a balanced diet.
Yeah.
Carnivore diet, sure, I understand that people have had health benefits from the carnivore diet,
but it's also thing.
Right.
Keto, same thing.
Same thing for people who live vegan. You can have a complete vegan diet and have a healthy life, and you can be a bodybuilder. There are vegan bodybuilders out there, and they're not, like you don't have to live in these extremes, and you can live healthy in these extremes, but the majority of us live somewhere in the gray, in the middle. And so, like, if you want to lose some weight, cool. For me, that means cutting down my carb intake and increasing my fats and proteins and exercising more. If I do those things, I will shed weight like nobody's business. Gotta cut down on some of this stuff too. Speaking of which, Al, can you know? Yeah.
So absolutely, and I think two main points that's a great point. I love this subject too, but that's my.
We don't need to get into health. This isn't a health podcast.
It's not.
But I was just trying to draw a comparison.
No, it's
everything exists in comparison, right?
Absolutely. And it's the other thing that I always like to remind myself and talk about with other people is that not only is everything nuanced, and most productive conversation and action, human action, comes from the gray and comes from nuance. And when you can fold all of these things in your mind and think about them critically and discuss and take action with a lot of nuanced detail rather than taking action on like small, focused or extreme views or positions, But the other factor too that I don't think enough people consider is that everything is subjective, and your health. I should. That's an extreme statement. I should say, most things are subjective. Like I said earlier, I do believe there is such a thing as objective.
Right.
There's finites exist. Absolute finites exist on the micro scale. There is no such thing as extremes on the macro scale. So that's kind of like generally, I think, my foundational viewpoint on that. But
someone's been studying economics.
yes, that's a future conversation. My latest obsession. But like to your point on health, like, yes, generally we can say things as things are true when we talk about generalities. Like, keto and veganism and carnivore. And the thing is like they all have diminishing returns after a certain point, and where that point is for you is very subjective.
Right. Some people don't want to be hungry. Some people want to feel full after they eat, and some of those diets do not allow you to feel full. You will not feel full.
Right. So it just doesn't work for a lot of people. And so you can say, yes, all of those things are diets that help you lose weight. But what's the other factors? Subjective and time, right? So it's all subjective to everyone and their body type, their blood type, their body composition, and how long is it effective for it. So it's back to the main point of nuance. It's all of these factors they're individually important, but then you compare them to each other and then the factors multiply.
Right.
And then you have to that's why I'm not trying to transition to this subject, but though there's lots of negative things that are happening with AI and quantum computing, there's also lots of extremely exciting things. Like you can easily, in our heads, we can take the smarter, more intelligent, we flex the muscles of critical thinking. We can do these things generally in our heads. We're good at that, but we're not. Our brains are geared towards creativity and inspiration, not so much crunching numbers and algorithms.
Yeah.
So we're fortunately have these amazing brains that have come up where the best thing that we're good at as humans is creating tools to do more stuff with less effort and energy.
Right.
So we've created AI, and I've spoken to quite a few people who are very pessimistic about the future of AI, and I've spoken to a lot of people who are on the extreme positive side. And, it's interesting, the types of people you meet. It tends to be people the pessimists tend to be people who are most going to be negatively affected by it, obviously. And the optimists are people working in tech, generally speaking.
I mean, it's a left versus right brain thing, really, that's kind of what it boils down to. Artistic people are more skeptical of AI than, logical is not the word I'm looking for, but computational people.
Yeah.
Engineers versus architects, right? It's that age-old engineers versus architects.
That's a good structure to think about it.
Yeah, because architects are artists. They're very mathematically oriented, and they have to be. Otherwise, what they dream up will come crashing down.
Right.
But it's the engineer's job to actually figure out the practical matter of arches are stronger than circles, stronger than squares.
And an architect has to know basics of engineering, but in a firm or an agency, they have staff engineers to double check and cross check the architects so that the architects can focus on the creativity.
Right. And then you have a technical writer who acts as a translator between those two people because they hate each other.
Yeah, exactly. That's
I carry reports to the engineers so the salespeople don't have to.
Yep.
It's an Office Space reference if anyone what exactly is it you do here? I'm a people person. I help people.
The Bobs.
Facts.
Facts, baby.
Yeah.
All right, well, moving on.
This is not a business podcast. We don't know
this is a linguistics podcast, and we haven't done enough of that yet, so we're going to cruise forward here. So, back on this point of this whole podcast, linguistics and etymology, words with a Z. What was that, folks?
Dude, where's my car?
Oh, yeah, dude, that was a deep cut. Holy shit, I got to watch that right now.
It's a classic.
Classic.
Do you have the continuum tense function?
Oh my god, dude! Yes, I gotta watch that. That was fucking Zeitgeist right there. Jesus, classic. So actually, the next thing that I had on the agenda was Antonym Pairs, which is fun, but I actually wanted to, since we said the word Zeitgeist several times now. Yeah, so Zeitgeist has been one of my favorite words, and I think it's becoming more and more. Yep, Google says it's just popped up like crazy the last 20 years.
Yep. Since that documentary.
Oh yeah. Have I even watched that? It's been on my. I think it's been on my watch.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's it's such a valuable word, especially to our previous point when we're trying to, people who are trying to stay in the gray and the nuance and discuss things with detail and cooperation and empathy. Understanding and knowing and using that word is valuable because the more that we understand what's going on socially and politically at the time, makes it a lot easier to be empathetic and to have meaningful conversations
instead of just vilifying everyone.
Instead of taking these extreme positions out of ignorance.
Yeah.
You know? And so on that point, I'm just going to read it off. So the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time. And the sentence example here is the story captured the zeitgeist of the late 1960s. Like it's a useful word to throw out when you're trying to mention or pull attention to the overall feeling and vibe of a period of time.
Yeah.
And it's not just temporal. It can also be, I think it's mostly,
for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's mostly used, I think most people, when they use it, they're trying to use it in the sense of like a decade or, a time period or, when we're referencing, like generations like Z and Alpha and whatever, or Zoomers and whatever, Boomers. But it also very much to your point, geographically, it can be also, I think it's probably less used this way, but I've used it before in terms of like a particular field, like the zeitgeist in the tech space or something like that.
Yeah, totally.
How do you feel about using it? Right.
Yeah.
Created a bit of a zeitgeist of the late 90s, early 2000s, whatever. How do you feel about like those few different ways of context of using it? What's like your favorite, or how do you feel about using it different ways like that? Or are you?
I think it makes
more strict to like temporal.
No, I think it has to be rooted in geography because the zeitgeist here is different than the zeitgeist in Mongolia.
Right. That's right.
The .com boom didn't hit Mongolia the same way that it hit the United States of America. I don't know anything about Mongolia. Let's be clear. The Gobi Desert is there, and I know Attila the Hun. There's a lot of history there that I just don't know, and that's just because I lived here and they lived there.
Kublai Khan was it him that built the wall to keep out the Mongols or something like that? Or was that Genghis? I can't remember.
That wall's in China.
Right. Well, wasn't that?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the Khans?
Yeah.
Chinese. Yeah.
So
Mongol.
growing up in Soviet Russia in the 70s versus growing up here in the 70s, the zeitgeist is entirely different. In one way, they're exactly the same. Our country or our block of countries hates this country. We had a block of countries too, but we don't refer to it that way.
Yeah.
But
the block versus the
West, essentially. Which is funny because
it's a good word too, actually.
Any Russian west of the Ural Mountains refers to themselves as a Westerner.
True, yeah. That's
but anyone east of Germany is considered an Eastern European. But like, if you go to isolationist countries like Finland, you don't know very many Finnish people. I guarantee it. Because Finnish people don't leave Finland that much.
Yeah.
And they just kind of like, they're in constant conflict with Russia. Russia's always trying to steal their shit. But also like, they also like just live in their little bubble of like, there's Norway and Sweden, and then here we are, just little Finland, And so their world is very different than ours.
Oh, before we get way too off subject, so I'm going to look up the etymology here. Now, pro tip to everyone listening and or watching, ChatGPT is fucking incredible for etymology when you don't like the limited, unfulfilling etymologies off of just Google or in most dictionaries.
There's Etym Online, which is phenomenal.
Etym Online, thank you for plugging that. Incredible resource.
Huge thing.
So good. And thank you, by the way, for turning me onto it.
Yeah.
So here's from CGPT. German, where's a compound of two words. I actually forgot about this. Zeit meaning time or era. That's why it's most commonly used as time, even though it's expanded quite a bit from that.
Yeah.
Old High German Zeit, which has cognates in other German. Do you know cognates? I don't know that word.
I would guess like predecessors or antecedents. Like
we'll look that up next. Yeah. That's interesting. Cognates in other Germanic languages like Old English. Tide, time, tide. Tide. Interesting.
I think it's cognate is comparative or like similar contextually.
Yeah, that makes sense. Time, tide. So it's interesting that they're using tide in reference to tide. Maybe originally people, can keeping track of time based off of tides came before even keeping track of time based off the moon cycle.
Yeah.
That could be.
Yeah.
See, this is why I love looking up etymologies on ChatGPT or something other than just the slick Google thing.
Here's cognate. Having the same linguistic derivation as another from the same original word or root.
Okay.
So
Drills down to something, two or more things drill down to something original, one thing original.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then Geist, meaning spirit or ghost,
the ghost of the time.
ghost of the times. Derived from Old High German Geist, related to Proto-Germanic Geistas, spirit, ghost, and Proto-Indo-European Geist, to be excited, amazed, or frightened. That's interesting. To be excited, amazed, or frightened by the ghost. Maybe.
Yep.
So we could pull that out to basically mean to be interested or fascinated, excited, or frightened by the spirit or ghost of the time or era. Does that seem valid?
Yeah.
Fucking fascinating.
Yeah. There you go.
To,
This is why you look at derivations, people. It's fun.
And the cool thing, just to plug fucking derivations in general, the cool thing about this, to really drill deep, though it takes time, you remember words so much more.
Yeah.
And just inculcate, another one of my favorite words, into your vocabulary extremely strongly by doing this. So just like, probably the main reason I even started this whole thing is so that I could turn more people on to spending more time looking stuff up, understanding things more. Because not only is it interesting and fun personally, but it creates, back to our original point of nuance and the gray
And dialogue.
Yeah. It creates the ability to do that. It literally it grows everyone's ability to cooperate, discuss, have meaningful dialogue, and empathy throughout all of that. So anyway.
Also, just like to kind of oversimplify it, or at risk of oversimplifying it, knowing things makes it possible for you to talk about that.
Yep.
If you don't know something, it's hard to discuss it without being talked at. If you do know something, you can talk about it and you can have a dialogue. If you don't, it becomes there becomes a disparity in the conversation. Someone explains to you why they're right, and then you lose why they're wrong.
Yeah,
Because a lot of people refuse to acknowledge that.
And in other words, I think basically what you're trying to say is people on the similar wisdom and intelligence levels can have meaningful conversations, but whereas if there's a strong disparity, it just makes things very difficult.
Yeah, and it's hard to
And pedantic.
Yeah, you don't want to proselytize to people,
Right.
You know, most people don't want to talk down to people. That's
Don't want to, and most people don't want to feel talked down to.
Right. So if you do feel like you're talking down to someone, you might just not want to talk to them anymore because you don't want to make them feel bad because you're smarter than them, or you think
If you have decent empathy and they're not a piece of shit.
If you think you're smarter than them, which like that in and of itself is a dangerous
Absolutely.
Thing to think, because everyone has different knowledge and different abilities, and
that's an interesting point too, because you can have like this large disparity, and then that comes with lots of problems of people that don't want to feel like they're talking down to, and people that are annoyed and resentful of feeling like demeaned.
Yeah.
Thank you. And but I think a lot of extremely fun to the point of like a lot of podcasts like Rogan or many podcasts is you have somebody who's an expert and you have somebody who is not way down here comparatively, but just underneath. Like
And
they
he's
have
willing to
shit
have a
to learn
dialogue.
and willing to have a dialogue.
Yeah.
That's, again, back to the point. I think this is becoming the theme of our episode.
Yeah.
Is nuance in the gray is most easily achieved and produces the most positive outcomes when people discussing are fairly close, but not perfectly. You know what I mean?
yeah, right.
Because you have two people that just often turns into an echo chamber and doesn't actually produce a lot of meaningful outcome because it's just like people that completely agree with each other.
Right.
They're on the same level.
It's like being sad at work. I hate that our boss did this.
Yeah,
me
exactly.
too.
It's just like the
Like,
same
oh,
bullshit
that's
over
a
and
real
over.
productive conversation that you're having,
And
really
then
improving your day.
And then if you're at all self-aware, later you just feel like, God, I feel like an idiot wasting time having that stupid water cooler bullshit.
Yeah, I literally apologized to a coworker yesterday about like I complain a lot, and we complain a lot together. And I'm sorry if I bring the mood down because like we're both on the same level, and we both have similar complaints, and so we hear something, we talk about it, and have the same complaints, and then it becomes an echo chamber, like you said.
Now, to be fair, there's value to the point of a therapeutic value, but you have to like
Commiserating.
commiserate. But you have to know when to shut up and get back to work.
Or do something about it.
or do something about it.
Yeah. If
Absolutely.
you don't like your job,
I got to piss like crazy, so
Yeah,
I'm
me
going to
too.
finish up this thing, and then we're going to pause for a pee break.
you're supposed to say no at word for our phones.
Exactly. Maybe someday I'll be lucky enough to make money off this thing. Doubtful. Doubtful. All right, so together, Zeitgeist literally translates to spirit of the time, referring to the prevailing cultural, intellectual, moral, or social climate of a particular period. And to our point that it's not just temporal,
Right, it's geographical,
moral,
for sure.
social, geographical.
If you go to Sentinel Island off the coast of India, where we basically as a world have decided it's not ethical to go there because they're an untouched civilization, basically. And they've killed pretty much everyone that has ever tried to go.
Fascinating subject
I love it, but I love the ethical discussion. It's a moral discussion more than an ethical discussion.
Both, but yeah, you're right. Mostly
Yeah.
moral.
Morally, we have agreed as a world to leave them alone, basically.
And I think that's good.
Yeah.
And
Let them live their lives, and let them. They're gonna eventually either let's be real. They're either gonna all die off from inbreeding and
it's got to go one of two ways. Yeah.
right, or they're gonna proliferate when more people come there, and it's gonna become a more advanced civilization in a long time.
Anyway, the last line here is the term gained prominence in philosophy and literature, particularly through German philosophers like Hegel, who used it to describe the collective consciousness or cultural ethos defining an era. So there you go, ladies and gents. Zeitgeist, one of my favorite words. Use it, live it, love it. All right, we're going to pause for tea break. So the to kind of go back to that earlier segue, cognate is a word. Wait, probably not cognate. It's probably cognate. Cognate. What do you think?
Is it adjective?
This is probably where Google is.
If it's a noun, it's probably cognate. If it's an adjective, it's probably cognate.
Oh yeah, that makes more sense. This is where your English degree is better than my.
Well, it's also, but it's not my English degree. It's derivations and linguistics more than English. I don't have a linguistics degree.
Right.
Linguistics is its own field.
To your point, the first definition here is a linguistics definition, and it is an adjective of a word having the same linguistic derivation as another.
Yeah.
English father, German Vater, Latin pater.
Yeah, those are cognate to each other. Or cognates.
Let me see. Cognate. It's cognate. I'm glad we got it right the first time. That makes me feel slightly better about myself. The term is obviously cognate with the Malay Sagan, whatever that means.
With the what?
It's the sentence example. Malaysian word.
Oh,
Sagan.
okay, yeah.
And then the second definition is formal, related, or connected. So we have a very specific linguistics definition and a formal definition, which is, funny enough, informal compared to linguistics definition.
Yeah.
Sentence example for the formal, related, connected definition is cognate subjects such as physics and chemistry. Okay, I see. For the noun version is linguistics a cognate word, or law a blood relative, especially on the mother's side. Huh. Interesting. Back to CGBT. A cognate word is a word that has the same linguistic origin as a word in another language. Cognate in another language. That's interesting. Cognates often share similar meanings, forms, and etymological roots due to their descent from a common ancestral language. For example, so we have modern languages, and then they have the same rate.
Yeah, Middle English, Old English.
Right.
And then before that, whatever they descended from, whether it's a Latin or
versus Germanic versus, yeah.
And if you understand Latin and Greek roots, you can understand words so well. So much of our language derives from Latin and Greek. So that if you understand those two and those roots, you're
everything.
Good spot.
Totally. And I'm sorry, I've realized that more and more the last like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
But not to segue too far, because I'm going to get back to this, but that is by itself is a fascinating subject. Probably could be an episode all in and of itself. But the actual primary derivative languages are Latin, Germanic, and what else? Greek. And then there's also the isn't like Middle Eastern semi-languages their own root like as well? Arabic and like
Farsi and
Farsi, like those
and Hindi.
Those
that's
originated on their own, right? Like separate from Germanic.
Yes, no, nothing exists in a vacuum, but yes,
for sure.
For just to some extent, yeah.
Interesting. So then, and what also like there's some Eastern languages, or excuse me, there's some like Far East languages too that are different, like Japanese and
Japanese,
Korean are their own root. That's completely separate from Latin, Germanic, right?
Right. Oh yeah.
I need to look
part
at
of that is because of geography, right? The expanse of the Gobi Desert, the Ural Mountains blocking people from traveling from Europe east. Why would you?
Yes, we need to
go
do a whole
east.
episode on this.
Yeah. Why
because
would you go
that's
east of the Ural Mountains if you don't
fascinating.
have to?
Yeah.
Why would you go even close to the Ural Mountains if you don't have to?
Fair.
I do want to do the Trans-Siberian train ride. I think
That would be super fun.
amazing.
Especially have the time to really sink in to the culture and the.
Yeah, like a day at each stop.
Mhm.
You know, like
At
spend
least, yeah.
a couple months just going
Yeah.
and exploring.
I would
the
even,
differences.
at the very least, would want to do like a day, including an overnight,
right.
if I could. I
Yeah,
don't know
and
if
get
the
on the
train
next train.
schedule Even
I think
allow
it's
that,
basically
but-
one train a day, or it might even be less.
All right, back to cognate. So cognates often share similar meanings, forms, and etymological roots due to their descent from a common ancestral language. For example, the English word mother and the Germanic word mutter are cognates because they both derive from the Proto-Indo-European root meter, hyphenated. Etymology of cognate. The word cognate comes from Latin co, meaning a prefix together or with, obviously, and gnatus, a past participle of nashi, meaning to be born. Interesting. To be born together.
Yep, that makes sense.
Very. That one is very clear cut, which is nice.
Well, if you think about the word natal or prenatal,
Right.
postnatal,
That's
There you
a great similar example.
Yeah.
Thus, cognatus in Latin means born together or of common descent. It entered English via Middle French cognat in the 16th century, maintaining its meaning of shared origin or kinship.
this from French is probably cognac. GN is nia.
Yeah.
French.
Cognac?
Yeah.
In its broader sense, it can also refer to people or things related by birth or descent, though this is less common in modern usage. Okay. Well, that's a fascinating word as well. One of my agenda points was antonym pairs. So to be this, we've gotten very tangential, but this one is far more specifically linguistics, and it's one of my favorite subjects. I love words in general, as we found out with Zeitgeist being one of my favorites, but I also love when again, I guess the overall theme is comparison and nuance and extremes. And it's been so valuable for consistent learning in my life to compare things. And one of the most valuable ways and tools in my toolbox that I've found to compare things is finding antonym pairs. And what I mean by that, literally antonym, two words that mean the opposite of each other, and pairing meaning they're words that are similar, maybe even cognates to each other, that mean completely opposite things or are somewhat related but don't quite mean the same thing. So antonyms or related, maybe not quite antonyms, but related but don't quite mean the same thing, but on a similar vein or subject.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite antonym pairs to spark off this conversation is laconic and loquacious. And part of the reason why I love it so much, this pair, is because they are also alliterative. And the basic definitions of each of these things is laconic, talking a lot. And, oh no, it's the other way around. Laconic, thank you, you're about to correct me. Laconic means being of few words, and loquacious means being of many, to the simple definitions of these two things. Now, one of them has very interesting etymology, the other one is a little bit more basic. But before we get into the etymology, how do you feel about that pair? What do you like about it?
Nothing.
Anyway,
No,
on to the next.
No, I think it's a great point. I think part of the fun of language is finding context and comparison, right? Back to where we started. It's baffling, but also like a word like concise might be easier to use than laconic, right? And more approachable.
And most people know concise and don't
Or
know
terse.
laconic.
Like those are words that people know without explanation.
Yeah.
But saying talkative versus saying loquacious is there's just like a linguistic flourish of saying loquacious.
Right.
It can sound pretentious for sure. Using either one of those words in the
Very
context.
subjective. We are talking to
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you're talking to a child, don't say those words. They're gonna be very confused, and you might not even say concise or terse.
Right.
You know? Like you would want. It's all about context, right? So in an academic context, they're fun, and in a conversational context, they're fun if you acknowledge the fun of it.
Yeah.
But there is a pretense to knowing these kinds of words and using them in everyday conversation that, like, as someone who spent a lot of time in college and has a lot of friends who didn't spend a lot of time in college, there's a time and a place for these kinds of words.
Yeah.
And the most interesting thing to me about it is, why do these words exist? Right?
Interesting.
Why does laconic exist? Why do we need that word? Why do we need loquacious?
Right.
I like them. They're good words. I think it's a great pair.
Yeah.
But why do they exist? And I think the etymology will explain that. But
For sure.
Concise and terse probably come from all different roots.
And that's really why I love the English language so much. Now, granted, I'll preface this by saying I don't know a second language yet, so I might fall in love more with another language. However, the great thing about English is that I would say the majority of languages on this planet influence either directly or indirectly the English language. And because we're a nation of immigrants, the USA anyway, and I guess the UK too, but especially the USA, we have such strong influences of these other languages, not just in history, but also recent history, that it makes it very versatile and very fun and much easier to be creative with it than a lot of other languages. Now, I was actually just talking with a friend last night, Brazilian, and she was expressing her love for Portuguese and how it's kind of similar to like Latin-based Romance languages.
What is a Romance?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I didn't. Wasn't quite sure. I only really know that like Italian and French.
Italian, French, Romanian, Spanish, and Portuguese.
Thank you. This is why I had you on today, man.
Most people don't know Romanian is actually one of the Romance.
I had no idea.
But if you listen to Romanian, it actually sounds very similar to Italian and Spanish.
Another episode idea, Romance languages.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that's why I love it. Yeah. But anyway, to get
Love Actually last night.
Yeah.
My wife. And
the wife,
Colin Firth goes to Portugal and writes his book and falls in love with his Portuguese caretaker or whatever, or
such a good
maid essentially at the house that he's staying at. And I was saying that it makes sense that they made it Portuguese rather than Spanish or French or Italian because less people know Portuguese.
Okay.
So it makes it a more analogous experience to more viewers to watch someone speaking Portuguese and go, I don't know that language. Whereas if I watch someone speaking French or Spanish or Italian, I've studied all three of those. So I would know some words and I would get it a little bit. Portuguese, I've never studied. And yes, there's some similarities because it's a Romance language. But it's different enough and foreign enough to more people, I think, that makes it more of a similar experience for all viewers.
And they were really trying to create that, at least initially before they fell in love, they were really trying to create that divide between the two to emphasize
language
barrier.
Yeah.
Language barrier as a core concept of that section, that part of the story of the overall.
Yeah, because England you could swim from England to France. Like, a lot of English people have a loose understanding of French because they're geographically right next to each other. Yeah. And French people, every French person I've ever met speaks English. So it's
fascinating.
Yeah, it was just kind of an interesting tangent, but we were watching that last night. I was like, I wonder if this was intentional for that reason.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
It's interesting. All right, so etymology for laconic, using few words, concise to the point of seeming terse or blunt, derived from the Greek word, I'm not even going to try, I don't even know these symbols, in English translated to laconicos, meaning Spartan or of Laconia. This is the one that I love, the actual geographical derivation. I love this one the most. The other one is not as interesting as this, but
well, with the QU, it's probably got a French root.
Yeah. Well, we'll see here. It says
we would stay on laconic. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
No, it's all good.
And flex.
Flex away. So, I mean, as guys, we all love, Spartan history and whatever, Sparta. So that's interesting on its own, but of Laconia, and geographically, Laconia was the region in ancient Greece where Sparta was located. And Spartans were known for their brevity of speech and disdain for verbosity, which is interesting because the loquacious types were right next door in Athens.
Right.
Those are the Senate. Was it Senate?
Yes,
it was. Okay. Yeah. The senators in the Senate were just like orators and known for propaganda and, famous verbose oration. And it created this crazy divide and many conflicts before they allied against the Persians. But that just that whole time period in history was super interesting because of the advent of democracy. Yeah, the origins or roots of democracy were born out of
Plato's Republic.
Greek history, Athens, the Senate, and then we have the Spartans. Yeah, it was just super fascinating because we had two people, very politically different people right next door to each other. Mm-hmm. These people that were trying to create, that were kind of pretentious and verbose and loquacious, right next to people who, and the Athenians and the Greeks are trying to create democracy. right next door to the Spartans, who honestly, their culture was much more collective, and seemingly, at least under modern concepts, antithetical to democracy, but yet it worked because they were such a small,
Yeah.
comparatively, obviously, to modern times, such a small group.
I don't mean to be.
No. Contradict me away. I
just think that the existence of a Senate is actually more of an indication of a republic rather than a democracy.
Thank you. No, that's a good point.
Yeah. So that's kind of what famously was birthed in that world was the republic context.
That's a fair point.
And democracy and the concept of a republic aren't like completely
Different.
but
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
not the same.
They're not. And that is a common misconception for a lot of people who don't know
This
proper
country is a
American
democratic
history.
republic.
Exactly. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's not, and it's barely even that anymore, but that's another subject.
The members of the Greek Senate weren't elected officials by the people,
Right.
which would be a democratic process. They were representatives of the people, which is a Republican process.
Thank you for correcting me. That's a very valuable point, and I don't want to lead people astray historically. So that is valuable. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Also-
back here, Laconia was the region in ancient Greece where Sparta was located, and Spartans were known for their brevity of speech and disdain for verbosity. The English word entered the language in the late 16th century through Latin laconius, maintaining its association with concise, like Spartan speech. Interesting. All right, now the etymology, which is tending to talk a great deal, talkative. Coming from Latin loquax, meaning talkative, which is derived from loqui, meaning to speak or to talk, and the suffix ax, which indicates a tendency or inclination towards something.
Okay.
So tendency or inclination to talk a lot.
Or just to know.
Or just to talk.
Yeah.
The word appeared in English in the mid-17th century, emphasizing excessive or fluent speech. Together, these words form a beautiful pair of antonyms contrasting the extremes of verbosity and reticence. I like that word, reticence, Dave. That's my favorite, so far anyway, my favorite antonym pair, because they are perfect antonyms and they're alliterative.
I feel like there's got to be something in the history of loquacious that's more interesting than not. But maybe not. There's like elocution. It probably comes from the same
Right, derivative,
root. Yeah.
cognate.
Yeah. Exactly.
Loquacious, it sounds much more fun or pretentious than laconic would, so it's interesting that laconic has the more interesting and geographical background versus loquacious. But a lot of Latin words are just very blunt, very specific.
Yeah. That's the
That is
cool part of Latin.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's intended to be not ambiguous.
Right.
It's supposed to be clear. It's similar to different styles of writing, where if you're writing in AP style, you want to be as unambiguous as possible so as to not allow people to misunderstand what you're saying.
By AP, you mean associated.
Yes. Yeah. The general standard for like journalistic writing in most media.
Versus, as opposed to
Chicago style or No, you would still use AP style, at least AP style grammar rules for op-eds.
Okay.
And conventions, but the simplicity of it is essentially things like you wouldn't say over when you can say more than, because over indicates as a preposition above something, but it can also mean more than. So by saying over,
more clear.
yeah,
to say.
in AP style, over means above. It does not mean more than.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was like a set of rules when it comes to.
Yeah, and they change all the time. They're constantly updating it based on, the zeitgeist.
I was just thinking the same thing, right? Probably exactly the same time you were thinking it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So the Oxford comma or the serial comma, if you want to refer to it that way, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Is necessary in certain contexts for sure, but it's also not necessary if you're saying I'm going to the store to get apples, bananas, and grapes. You don't need a comma after bananas there. Like I'm not saying bananas and grapes is one thing, or like the and is sufficing as a comma essentially. Right. But if you're saying something a little bit more complex than that, or using multiple words, or there are different ideas mixed in there, then there's a value to it.
And in that, not to segue too much off of this, but that the Oxford comma is an interesting one for me because, like, your example is good because when you're talking about something simplistic like apples, bananas, and grapes, it's not as necessary to put a pause. But if you're talking about like after bananas, right, and before the and, because it's a simple, it's more. You're typically not writing that out. You're probably talking about it verbally, and it's just something quick you need to say and move on.
Right.
But if you're talking about something complex or controversial or whatever, sometimes that pause between that noun and the and is actually beneficial to make people pause and think a little bit more about what you're saying.
Right. But also, just going to the root of what a comma is, commas essentially replace the word and in a sentence. Okay. If you actually look at a lot of sentences. That's not one for one. There's a million comma rules and why and when you use a comma, but often a comma would be sufficiently replaced by an and, but it would be very verbose or loquacious to just say and to have a really long run-on sentence that you don't want, you know?
So it offers, I guess, a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the difference between the comma and the word and is that it adds that pause.
Yeah.
And it gives a little bit more utility.
Yeah. So, but verbally you can't hear a comma.
Right.
But in writing, you don't even pause when you're reading either. But you mentally know there is a comma here.
Right.
So
it kind of is a signal to basically say like, all right, pay a little more attention here, especially if there's a comma and an and.
Yeah.
Right next to each other.
Yeah.
Which generally I don't like to do. Seems like too much most of the time.
Yeah. I mean,
my opinion.
There are a lot of contexts in which it's necessary.
Interesting.
Also, if you have two, I mean, we could dive into the necessity of having commas between two independent clauses and or one dependent clause and an independent. But like, there's so many contexts where commas are just thrown out willy nilly for no reason and or excluded for no reason.
Like overall, I'm generally personally a proponent of how messed up our educational system is. I'm definitely a proponent of self-learning and being self-motivated and a self-starter. Definitely in terms of education, I'm a big proponent of that. Yeah, because of how weak and corrupt our education system is. However, the classic strict scientific education in grammar, I think, is extremely valuable, and it's just gone out the window. Like it's just not taught well at all.
Yeah, just like the professionalism of emails that you receive in the workplace. It's jarring, seeing how bad people are at using the language the only language they speak.
Now that being said, it is to the degree that grammar is important is the degree of the importance of the conversation being had. And in most business scenarios, you really don't need great grammar to get shit done.
The clarity of ideas is the most important part.
Exactly. So when you're talking about those really important subjects in the gray area and with nuance, the grammar is important.
Yeah. But then you look at that episode of The Office where Kevin starts using less words. Like, I work now.
I vaguely remember.
I can't even think of any of the examples. But he essentially he just dumbs down his language as much as possible to use as few words as possible and still convey the idea.
Yeah.
But instead of saying, I'm going to do work now, he says, I do work now. Or I work now. And like, it's just like that oversimplification, that brevity or that laconicity. How pretentious can we make laconic sound?
Right.
The brevity of that is humorous. It's funny. It's not like helpful at all.
Right.
No one's like, oh, he's hacked language.
Yeah.
No one's impressed.
It wasn't an improvement.
Right. Right. You're defying convention, and it's almost rude to do it because you're defying the convention for the sake of I mean, who knows the motivation of Kevin Malone in The Office, but you know what I mean. Get home to my head.
As I was hoping, we only got through like half of our outline.
Yeah, I figured.
Which is great.
Tackle all that.
Because it gives us a lot more to talk about in the future. But anyway, thanks for coming on, brother. I really appreciate it. It was super fun. And we'll have a part 2 sometime soon. Do you want to plug your beer Instagram?
Sure. Hobbyist, HOBBEERIST. It's just a casual, not super diligently posted to account. I go to a lot of local breweries in the Seattle area, and I'm a big fan. I have a lot of hot takes, and I don't really say negative things about breweries because I'm not an expert. So if I have something good to say, I will. And if I have something bad to say, I won't.
Good way to live life.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Let's go.
Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.